I've been camping and hiking for most of my life, and I've always enjoyed the quiet solitude of the outdoors. I've seen my fair share of the wild, from rugged mountain trails to deep forest walks, but nothing quite prepared me for the trip I took 6 months ago. It wasn't even a particularly difficult hike, just a day trip into the outback of Australia, one of those areas far enough from civilization that it felt like I was the only person on Earth. The kind of place where time seems to slow down, and every step you take feels like it's marking a piece of history, untouched by human hands. I've been planning this trip for a while. The outback, while unforgiving in its own way, has always had a quiet draw for me. There's something about the vastness of the land, the way it makes you feel small and insignificant, yet incredibly alive. The heat, the red earth, and the vast stretches of sky were always appealing to me. My plan for the day was simple. I would hike along the creek bed, make my way through some remote patches of scrubland, and just enjoy the beauty of the place. I'd done it a dozen times before, nothing particularly dangerous about it. I set off early in the morning, the sun already burning hot on my back. I was carrying only the essentials: a first aid kit, some water, a light jacket, and a few snacks. I've always been fairly self-sufficient when I'm out there, and I didn't feel the need for anything extravagant. The creek bed I was walking along had been relatively dry for the past few months. It wasn't a typical rushing stream, but more of a slow, meandering watercourse, often just a trickle or completely dry. That's why I wasn't overly cautious. The ground felt solid enough as I walked, and I was making good time. The air was thick and still, almost heavy, and every now and then, I'd hear the faint rustling of a bird or the distant sound of an animal moving through the underbrush. The world around me felt quiet, in a way that was both peaceful and eerie. There's a certain kind of silence in the outback that you can't find anywhere else, almost oppressive, like the land is watching you. I'd heard stories from locals about the unpredictability of the terrain, how it could change without warning, but I always brushed it off as just part of the drama of storytelling. After all, I had hiked through some pretty difficult terrain before. I had been out here enough to know what I was doing. The creek bed was narrow and winding, with steep, jagged banks that rose up on either side. The floodwaters from a recent heavy rain had carved out deep, undercut areas along the sides of the creek. I wasn't paying close attention to the ground beneath me. The earth around the creek was loose, and the recent rains had made the dirt soft and unstable. The first indication that something was wrong came quickly. The ground beneath my feet shifted with a subtle tremor, almost like a warning. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. The earth gave way beneath me and I fell. I didn't have time to react. There was no instinctive move to catch myself or brace for impact, just a sudden drop. I plummeted 6 meters, twisting as I went. I remember the horrifying feeling of freefall, a rush of air and the sickening thought that I couldn't stop myself. My body somersaulted through the air, spinning uncontrollably. My leg struck something hard, an exposed tree root that had been left by the floodwaters. The pain was instant, sharp and white-hot, radiating through my body as my tibia snapped with an audible crack. The shock of the break shot through my body like electricity, but I didn't have time to process it before the next sickening moment. As my body continued its awkward, uncontrolled descent, my ankle collided with another jagged root, and the second break happened almost simultaneously with the first. It was like my body was being torn apart as I tumbled downward. I landed hard on my side, and the impact caused a sickening crunch. I felt the sharp, searing pain of my arm breaking in 2 places. The force of the landing drove the air from my lungs. I was stunned, momentarily winded, and then the panic started to set in. The creek bed was muddy, filled with a combination of algae and cow manure, old, rotting remnants of livestock that had wandered too close to the water's edge. The smell hit me almost immediately, a rancid, thick odor that burned my nose and throat. It made my stomach lurch, but I barely had the presence of mind to register that it was the least of my worries. I had no idea where I was in relation to anything. The fall had rattled my mind, leaving me dazed and confused. The concussion hit me hard, making it feel like my head was full of cotton, as if I couldn't think straight. I could hear the rush of blood in my ears, and every time I moved, a wave of nausea rolled over me. My vision blurred. It was like I wasn't fully aware of what was happening, like I was detached from my own body. My first instinct was to try and move, to get up and assess the damage, but the pain was too overwhelming. My leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and my arm was hanging limply at my side. I knew I needed to stay still to avoid making things worse, but my brain was in a fog. I was terrified not just of the pain, but of the realization that I might be completely alone out here. I managed to gather enough coherence to check my surroundings. I was in a narrow, muddy depression in the creek bed, surrounded by jagged rocks and exposed tree roots. The walls of the creek rose steeply on either side of me. There was no easy way out of here. I had fallen far enough that I didn't think I could climb back up without help, and I had no idea how long it would take before anyone noticed I was missing. I was alone. I began to panic as the weight of my situation hit me. The fact that I was stuck in the outback, miles from the nearest town, with broken bones, a concussion, and no way to call for help, started to sink in. I could hear nothing but the distant rustle of wind through the trees. My heart pounded in my chest, my breathing quick and shallow. It felt like the world was closing in around me, pressing me deeper into the mud. But somehow my mind started working through it. First aid kicked in automatically. Thank God for training, I thought. I couldn't feel my arm properly, but I knew I had to keep it immobilized. My leg was clearly broken, and I had to do something about it. The immediate fear was how to get myself out of there. Crawling wasn't an option, not with the pain. So I had to splint my leg as best as I could. It was all so disorienting, my head spinning from the concussion, but I had no choice. I had to move, had to get back to the surface. Using what little strength I had left, I gathered some dry twigs, strips of bark, and some rope I had in my bag. My hands shook as I worked to make a makeshift splint for my leg and arm, but the effort required more focus than I had. I knew that if I didn't do something to stabilize myself, I might pass out from the pain or the shock, and then I really would be stuck. It took me hours to drag myself up the almost vertical slope. I had to inch my way up slowly, using every bit of strength in my body to pull myself up. The effort made my injuries flare up, and every movement was agonizing, but I kept going. Every time I thought I couldn't take another step, I reminded myself that giving up wasn't an option. Finally, I made it to the top of the slope, barely able to catch my breath. The pain was unbearable, but the sight of the road ahead, just a small clearing where I knew a passing car might be able to see me, was enough to push me forward. My hands were bloodied from the crawl, and my clothes were soaked in sweat and dirt. But I was out, barely. I don't remember much about how I flagged down the passing car, but I do remember the feeling of relief when I finally made it to a hospital, for hours away. They rushed me in, and from there, everything became a blur of medical procedures and recovery. 6 months later, I'm still not fully healed. My tibia, ankle, and arm are all still recovering, though the physical pain is now something I can manage. The psychological scars, however, run deeper. I've been back to that part of the outback since, but the memory of that fall haunts me. I don't think I'll ever truly feel safe out there again. The land is beautiful, yes, but it's also unforgiving. And I learned the hard way just how quickly the outback can go from peaceful to deadly. I'm still recovering, physically and mentally, but I've learned to respect the wilderness in a way I never did before. There's a darkness out there, not in the trees or the ground, but in the unpredictability of it all. Nature doesn't care about us. It doesn't have to. We're just visitors, and sometimes the land reminds us of that in ways we can't ignore. I've always loved camping. Growing up, the woods were my escape from the noise and pressure of everyday life. Whether it was a weekend trip to the mountains or a longer trek into some remote national park, I'd jump at the chance to get outside. The feeling of being surrounded by nature, isolated from everything else, was something I craved. A couple of years ago, I decided to take a solo trip into a secluded area I'd been wanting to explore for a while. It was far from any roads, off the beaten path, and about as remote as you could get. I wasn't worried. I'd done solo hikes before, and I knew what I was doing. I had a solid plan, a reliable GPS, all the necessary equipment, and years of outdoor experience. This was supposed to be one of those trips that you remember for the beauty of nature, not for anything dangerous. The area I chose was rugged and wild. It wasn't the kind of place where people usually go camping. The dense trees, the sound of the creek running nearby, and the occasional rustle in the underbrush were the only things keeping me company. For the first couple of days, everything went perfectly. The weather was mild, and the nights were peaceful. I set up my tent by the creek, enjoying the quiet, and spent my days hiking around the area, exploring the trails and taking photos. But it wasn't the physical challenge of the terrain that would end up being my greatest obstacle. No, that came in the form of an unexpected misstep. I had been hiking along a narrow trail that followed the creek. It was tricky to navigate, with thick vegetation pressing in on both sides. The ground was uneven, littered with loose rocks, and there were occasional spots where the trail would open up to small, steep drops into the creek below. I had crossed a few of those spots without incident, but I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have when it happened. I stepped wrong. My foot slipped on the loose earth, and before I could even react, my left ankle twisted painfully under me. The sharp crack of bone snapping echoed in my ears, and I felt a wave of intense, nauseating pain shoot through my leg. I don't remember screaming, but I must have, because I could hear my voice crackling through the air. I collapsed to the ground, my body heavy with the weight of the injury. For a moment, I just laid there, staring at my ankle, which was now swelling rapidly, and the pain was so overwhelming I couldn't focus on anything else. My first thought was that I needed to stay calm. The wilderness had a way of making you feel both insignificant and powerful at the same time. I wasn't going to let a broken ankle become my undoing. I tried to sit up, but the pain made my stomach churn, and I almost passed out from the effort. I had to brace myself against a nearby tree to keep my balance. Slowly, I managed to get onto my hands and knees, then up to my feet. My injured ankle barely supported my weight. I felt like I was about to fall again at any moment, but I forced myself to stay upright. I had to think. I still had my pack on my back, which contained some basic first aid supplies, a map, and a few energy bars. I'd always prided myself on being prepared, but now that I was in this situation, I found myself wishing I had more. I could barely walk, let alone hike out to find help. I needed to get a grip on the situation and fast. I pulled out my first aid kit. My leg felt like it was on fire, and every time I tried to move it, the pain was excruciating. But I had to do something. I needed to splint my ankle to stabilize it, and I had to do it alone. The swelling was getting worse, and I didn't have much time before things would get even more difficult. I was starting to feel the effects of the shock as well, dizzy, lightheaded, and a little disoriented. But the adrenaline kept me focused. I was alone in the woods, and I knew I couldn't afford to panic. Not now. I rummaged through my bag, finding a couple of sticks and some cloth to use as a makeshift splint. The whole time, I was aware of how much worse this could get if I didn't get my ankle stabilized. I could have stayed on the ground and waited for help, but I was miles from the nearest road, and no one was coming for me. I'd have to get myself out of this mess. The makeshift splint wasn't pretty, but it worked. It wasn't ideal, but it would keep my ankle from moving too much. With my leg as stabilized as I could manage, I took a deep breath and focused on the next step, getting out of there. I knew the nearest place where I could get help was about 5 miles away over rough terrain, and that was assuming I could make it that far. My head spun with the thought, but I shook it off. I didn't have any other options. Every step was agony. The terrain was rocky, uneven, and unforgiving. The weight of my pack made every movement worse, but I couldn't afford to leave it behind. It had everything I might need, including the water I desperately needed. The creek I had been following was no longer in sight, and the dense brush around me made every step feel like I was pushing through thick mud. But I kept moving. The pain was constant, but the fear of being stuck out here, alone, with no help for miles, pushed me forward. It was slow going. I had to stop every few minutes to rest, but I refused to sit down for too long. The more I sat, the harder it was to get up again. Hours passed. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, and I realized I hadn't thought about how much time had passed. My mind was consumed with the single goal of getting out of there, step by painful step. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached a clearing. I was exhausted, my body shaking with every movement, but I knew I was closer to safety. I looked around for any sign of a trail or a road, and after a few minutes, I saw it. A faint dirt road cutting through the trees. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me hope. I had to crawl the last few hundred meters. My ankle was so swollen and painful that walking was out of the question. I dug my hands into the dirt and crawled along the road, gritting my teeth against the pain. Eventually, I reached the road, and that's when I saw the headlights of a vehicle approaching in the distance. At that moment, I felt a rush of relief that I can't even begin to describe. The car pulled up, and the driver must have seen the state I was in. They stopped, and I could barely hold myself together as I was helped into the car. The ride to the nearest hospital was long, but I don't think I've ever been more grateful for a simple, bumpy car ride. The doctors there were incredible, and they got me patched up as best they could. The road to recovery hasn't been easy. I spent weeks in a hospital, followed by months of physical therapy. I'm still not fully healed, but I'm getting there. Looking back, I'm still amazed that I managed to make it out of that situation. I don't know how I did it. I was terrified, confused, and in excruciating pain, but somehow I was able to keep going. I know that not everyone would have reacted the way I did. The pain was overwhelming, and there were moments when I thought I wouldn't make it. But in the end, my preparation, my determination, and sheer willpower helped me survive. I was alone, but I didn't give up. I did what I had to do to get out of there. It's been a long recovery, and I'm not the same person I was before the accident. I think about that day a lot. It was horrifying, yes, but it also taught me something. It taught me that we are capable of much more than we think we are, even in the face of overwhelming fear and pain. The wilderness is a beautiful place, but it's also unforgiving. And in the end, it's up to us to take care of ourselves when things go wrong. The Canadian wilderness is vast, wild, and unforgiving. Growing up in the city, I'd always found solace in nature. Quiet hikes, exploring remote areas, and getting lost in the tranquility of the forest. I had a passion for geology and was studying it at university, focusing on field research. It was 1981 when I found myself in Nova Scotia, a place known for its rugged, uncharted beauty, conducting research for my master's thesis. My days were spent scouring the land, mapping rock formations, and recording data. It was the perfect place to be, isolated, peaceful, and challenging in the way that only nature can be. I had grown accustomed to being alone in the wilderness, but nothing could have prepared me for the terrifying experience I would face one late afternoon when I was conducting research in a remote boulder field deep in the woods. It was a typical Nova Scotia landscape, thick with trees, moss-covered rocks, and steep ravines. The dense forest had a way of swallowing sound, leaving an eerie quiet all around. I was walking a transect, a straight line to measure geological formations, which led me across a large, scattered boulder field. The rocks were massive, towering in places, slick with moss from the humidity, and uneven in ways that would make even the most seasoned hiker nervous. I remember thinking to myself how beautiful the landscape was. Mist curling around the rocks and the steady hum of the wind through the trees. But there was something unsettling about the place. The air felt heavy, as though nature was holding its breath, waiting for something. I wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion from days of hiking and climbing, or the weight of being so far out in the wilderness, but as I traversed the boulder field, I took my time, looking for the best routes to walk along. I slipped once or twice, my feet sliding along the moss, but nothing too bad. Then, without warning, my foot hit a particularly slick patch of rock, and I lost my balance. My body shot forward, my hands bracing against the cold stone, but it was too late. My feet couldn't find purchase, and I was sent sprawling. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. I felt myself falling, the world spinning around me as I tumbled down the rocks. I managed to grab onto something, anything, But it wasn't enough. The next thing I knew, I was wedged between two enormous boulders. My body was crammed into a narrow crevice, my feet dangling just above what appeared to be a deep, dark void. The gap between the rocks was tight, too tight, and I couldn't pull myself out. My arms were wedged above my head, holding me precariously in place, but they weren't strong enough to lift myself out. My body was trapped, suspended in the air, my legs unable to find anything solid to stand on. My first thought was panic, a surge of adrenaline that flooded my veins. I tried to wiggle free, twisting my body in every direction, but the rocks didn't budge. I was stuck, truly stuck, and I was miles from the nearest road with no cell phone, no GPS, no way of calling for help. My mind raced as the realization set in. If I didn't get myself free, no one would find me. The isolation of the situation was enough to make my heart pound. I could feel the weight of the boulders pressing against me, but at the same time, there was no real danger of the rocks shifting. They were solid and immovable, holding me tightly in place. Still, I couldn't help but feel a gnawing fear that if I didn't get out soon, I might not be able to at all. The air was damp, cool against my skin, and the scent of wet moss clung to everything. The sound of the wind through the trees felt distant, almost muffled by the intensity of my situation. I struggled again, harder this time, pulling with everything I had, but the rocks held me firm, and the strain on my arms and legs was beginning to wear me down. I had to stop. My heart was racing, and my breath was shallow. There was a panic building in my chest, but I had to keep it under control. I couldn't afford to waste energy freaking out. I needed to think clearly. I tried to push the fear out of my mind. Focus, focus. What could I do next? I looked around, trying to find a way to free myself. My body hung like a puppet, suspended between the two rocks. I could see the ground below me, a jagged drop into a deep, dark pit. Nothing but the sheer drop to the earth below. There was nothing to grab onto. There was no way to climb my way out of the crevice. I could feel my legs trembling with the strain of holding myself up. I had no choice but to make myself as calm as possible. I had to use my mind to get out of this. Slowly, carefully, I adjusted my body to make the smallest movements possible. The first few minutes felt like an eternity, but then my eyes locked onto something that might be the key. A thick root growing out of the side of one of the boulders, just within reach. It wasn't much, but it was something. I focused on that root, willing my arm to stretch toward it. I reached out, my hand brushing against the root, but it was far enough that it wasn't within my immediate grasp. My body groaned with the effort of stretching, but I couldn't give up. I shifted my weight slightly, adjusting my legs as best I could, trying to find a more comfortable angle from which to reach the root. But every movement made me feel like I was on the verge of falling. The void below me was terrifyingly close, and every inch of movement brought me closer to the edge. I paused again. Breathe. Calm down. You can do this. Another attempt. My fingers closed around the root. It was rough, solid, and much thicker than I had initially thought. It wasn't just a flimsy vine. It could hold me. My heart surged with hope as I gripped it with both hands, trying to secure myself to it. I pulled hard, using every ounce of strength in my arms, but the root held. For a moment, I thought I had found my way out, but I was still stuck, still in the narrow crack, my legs dangling above the abyss. Now came the hardest part. I had to pull myself up. My arms burned with the effort, and my body felt heavy with exhaustion. It took everything I had just to move a few inches, but I kept pulling, fighting against the weight of my own fear and the pain in my muscles. I was shaking from the effort, but I had no choice but to keep going. Hour after hour, I struggled, inching my way up the crevice, my arms and legs sore, my head spinning from the exertion. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, and I knew that I had to get out before darkness fell. If I didn't, I would be stuck there all night. The thought made my heart race even more, but somehow, I pushed through it. At long last, after what felt like an eternity of pulling and struggling, I finally managed to work my way up high enough to get one foot onto a ledge. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Slowly, cautiously, I used the root to help pull myself higher until I was able to get my other foot onto the same ledge. My arms were shaking from the effort, and my breath was ragged, but I was free. I had made it. I pulled myself the rest of the way out of the crevice, each movement feeling like a victory. The moment I was clear, I collapsed onto the ground, panting and gasping for air. My legs were weak beneath me, but I was safe. I had survived. It took everything I had just to get back to my vehicle, which seemed miles away at the time. The walk back to the car was long. My body drained of energy, but I made it. When I finally reached my truck, I couldn't believe I had done it. I had been so scared, so sure that I wasn't going to make it. But somehow I had managed to free myself to think through the fear and to get out. I took a couple of days off after that. Time to regroup, to calm myself, and to reflect on what had just happened. I wasn't sure if I would ever go back to that boulder field, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never take the wilderness for granted again. Nature could be beautiful, but it was also dangerous. Could break you if you weren't careful. And when I look back on that day, I remember the fear, the pain, and the overwhelming desire to survive. I remember how, even though I thought I was done for, I kept fighting. And that, in the end, was what got me out of that wilderness alive. I've been living in these woods for years now, learning the rhythms of the seasons, understanding the whispers of the trees, the flow of the streams, the scent of the wind. The forest is my home, but nothing in all my time here could have prepared me for that one night. The night I fought to survive between a fierce storm and a human who was out for blood. It all started like any other late summer evening. The air was thick with moisture, the kind of warmth that promises a thunderstorm. The trees were restless, shaking their leaves in the growing breeze. It wasn't unusual, not really. Sometimes the wind would pick up and the sky would darken. But that night, something felt different. The wind felt angrier, like it had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I was hunkered down in a small clearing, my fur sticking to my skin with the humidity, my eyes scanning the horizon, looking for anything out of place. I could smell rain coming, and that's when I heard it, the deep, rumbling roar of thunder. I instinctively stood up, ready to head deeper into the forest where the trees would offer better shelter from the coming storm. The sky overhead began to twist into dark clouds, fast, as if something was pulling it. The wind was picking up again, now howling through the trees, snapping branches and bending the trunks. I knew the storm was about to hit hard, but what I didn't know was that this wouldn't be just any storm. This would be a derecho. Before I could find cover, the first gust of wind slammed into me like a freight train. The trees groaned and cracked around me. My massive body was knocked sideways, my paws scrambling for purchase on the slippery ground. The air was thick with dirt and debris, making it hard to see. I dug my claws into the earth and tried to steady myself, but the gusts kept coming, relentless, twisting and howling like a mad beast. I had to move, had to get away from the clearing. It was too open, too exposed. But as I stumbled through the trees, the wind was so strong that it tore at me, pushing me backward. I had never encountered anything like this before. The storm was thrashing everything in its path. My fur was soaked, my claws aching from trying to hold onto anything. My body slammed against trees and rocks by the ferocity of the wind. I could barely hear anything other than the roar of the storm and the cracking of the woods around me. I needed shelter, but I couldn't even see straight. The rain began to pour, freezing cold, like needles on my skin. I made my way through the woods, desperate to find something to shield myself from the storm. The trees were bending so much, I feared they might snap and fall on me. But then, in the midst of the chaos, I smelled something, a scent that didn't belong in the woods. It wasn't the usual smell of earth or rain or the animals that called these woods home. It was something sharp, metallic, and wrong. I froze, the hairs on my back standing up. It was a human. I couldn't see them, but I could smell them, strong, like sweat and fear, mixed with something else. I didn't know what it was at first, but I recognized the scent of something dangerous. I turned and tried to move away, hoping to avoid whatever it was that had entered my territory. But then I heard something that froze my blood, the faint sound of a twig snapping, Then another, and another. The human was moving closer, cautiously, like they were hunting. But what for? I had to act quickly. The wind was howling, the storm was blinding, but the human was getting closer. I couldn't just sit here and wait for them to find me. I turned on my heels, trying to retreat further into the woods. But then, out of nowhere, I heard a sharp crack of a branch, followed by the sound of something heavy thudding against the ground. The human was close, so close. I crouched low, my muscles tensing. I had to make sure I wasn't seen. The wind screamed around me, but it worked in my favor, masking the sounds of my movements. I could hear the human now, breathing heavily, their footsteps slow but deliberate. They were close, close enough that I could hear the subtle rustle of their clothes. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, the human came into view. I saw them for the first time. A man, young, maybe in his 30s, wearing a torn, mud-streaked jacket. His eyes were wide, wild, as if he was as scared of the storm as I was. But there was something else in his eyes, something darker. It wasn't just fear. It was determination, and that made me wary. I didn't have much time to think. I needed to stay hidden, to wait for him to pass. But before I could make my move, I saw it. He was holding something in his hands, something that glinted in the faint light of the storm. It was a knife. My heart pounded in my chest. A knife? Why would a human be carrying a knife in the woods during a storm like this? I knew instinctively that this wasn't good. This wasn't just some lost wanderer. This was a threat. The man's eyes scanned the forest, and I knew that he had already spotted something he was targeting. His gaze flicked past me, and for a split second, I thought he hadn't seen me. But then, as I took a step back, trying to edge away, I heard a strange sound, the unmistakable scraping noise of tape being pulled off of something. I looked up in confusion. To my horror, the man had taped the knife to his hand. He even taped it to his paw, as if he was deadly serious. He was going to use it on me. I froze, my body screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. He was blocking the only exit, and the storm raged around us. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to escape. I was trapped. My mind raced. I had never been in this kind of situation. Humans weren't supposed to be like this. They weren't supposed to be this aggressive, this prepared. It was clear now that he wasn't just lost. He was hunting, and I was the prey. The wind picked up again, and the storm's fury doubled, tearing through the trees like an angry spirit. I could barely hear anything over the roar of the tempest, but I could hear him now, breathing heavily, moving toward me with the knife in hand. I had no choice. I was backed into a corner, and I needed to fight. My instincts kicked in. I knew how to defend myself, how to survive. I lunged forward, my massive paws striking the ground with force. The human tried to react, his hands fumbling with the knife, but it was too late. I knocked him back, sending him sprawling onto the wet earth. But he wasn't done. He scrambled to his feet, wild eyes flashing with rage. The knife was still taped to his hand, and he was coming toward me again, this time with more desperation. I roared, the sound reverberating through the storm. The wind howled around us, the rain slashing like needles, but none of it mattered. My only focus was him, the human who was determined to take me down. We clashed again. This time, I swiped my claws at him, aiming for his chest, but he managed to dodge, his breath ragged. The knife flashed in the storm's dim light. I swiped again, narrowly missing him. I could feel the fury building inside me, the fear of being caught, the instinct to survive, but this human, he was not backing down. The storm's fury continued to rage around us. Trees were snapping, the air thick with debris, and yet, in the midst of it all, the fight between us seemed to slow down, as though everything else had faded into the background. The only thing that mattered now was getting away from this madman. I needed to make sure I survived. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of struggling, I saw an opening. The human had slipped, his footing lost on the slick earth. With a final push, I launched myself at him, knocking the knife from his hand. He scrambled to recover, but I wasn't going to give him the chance. I was done. I turned and ran, my heart pounding, my body slick with sweat and rain. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I made it out of the woods that night, but not without a deep, gnawing fear in my chest. The storm raged on, but I was far enough away to feel safe. I never saw that man again, but the memory of him, the knife, the desperation in his eyes, stays with me. That night, the storm wasn't the only thing I had to survive. I had to survive him too, and I did. I don't remember the exact date, but it was early autumn, just cold enough at night to warrant an extra blanket, but warm during the day when the sun hit the open ground. My buddy and I had been planning this camping trip for months. We picked a remote spot deep in the forest of British Columbia, where there was no reception, no trails nearby, and we had to drive nearly an hour down old logging roads just to get to the clearing we'd picked out on satellite maps. The idea was to completely disconnect. No phones, no GPS, no contact with the outside world. We brought an old topo map and a compass, just in case, but we didn't plan to go far once we set up camp. Mostly we wanted to drink a little, sit by the fire, maybe fish in the creek we saw marked about a half-mile south of our spot. Just get away from it all for a while. We arrived in the late afternoon, the sun low but still giving enough light for setup. The clearing was as perfect as it looked on the satellite image. Level ground, a few fallen logs to sit on, and enough space between trees to feel open but still sheltered. We parked my buddy's old 4Runner on a patch of packed dirt just off the logging road, carried out our gear, and set up camp. Tent, tarps, fire pit, routine stuff. By the time the fire was going and the whiskey was uncorked, the sun had dropped behind the treetops. The woods went from golden to gray in what felt like minutes, and it was like flipping a switch. That deep, total silence you only get in places far from people settled over the forest. Every crack of a twig, every gust of wind sounded amplified. Around midnight, we started to hear it. At first, I thought it was some kind of bird call, but then it repeated louder, longer, and full of this edge, this raw pitch that raised the hair on my arms. It sounded like someone being murdered, but far off, maybe a half-mile away. Then again, louder. I glanced at my buddy and I could tell we were both trying to play it cool, but we were frozen. I'd never heard anything like that before. It didn't sound like any animal I could name. We had a shotgun in the car, but it wasn't loaded. I remember thinking that was probably a stupid move. The sound came again, closer. It was high and shrieking at the start, then dropped into this guttural, choking noise that died out suddenly. We sat there in the flickering light of the fire, neither of us saying a word. I'm sure if I had a heart monitor on, it would have looked like I was in cardiac arrest. Eventually, the sound stopped. We poured another drink. The whiskey helped, just a little. We didn't talk about it that night, not really. Just sat and listened to the fire and the occasional rustling of leaves. I don't think either of us slept well. Every little noise had me wide awake and gripping my sleeping bag like it was a safety net. The next morning, we were both quiet. It wasn't awkward, just reflective. We were still chewing on what we'd heard. Was it a cougar? A fox? Some injured animal? I wanted to believe that. I really did. Around 9 in the morning, we heard an engine, a soft sputter that got louder. I stepped out of the tent and saw a small, beat-up pickup truck coming slowly down the old logging road. The thing looked like it was from the 70s, rust creeping out around the fenders, and the driver was this old man in his 60s or maybe older, white beard, flannel shirt, a big dog riding shotgun. The truck rolled up near our site and stopped. He got out, walked up like he knew us. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded, gave us a little wave, and started scratching his dog behind the ears. It was odd. We were easily 45 minutes from any paved road, probably 20 miles from the nearest house. How did this guy just show up? He had a handgun on his hip. I noticed it immediately, worn holster, like it had been there every day for decades. I tried not to fixate on it, but I couldn't ignore it. It changed the dynamic. Suddenly, all I could think about was how alone we were out here. No cell service. No one knew our exact location. If this old guy wanted to do something, he could, and there wouldn't be anyone around to stop him. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make things worse, but I kept thinking about the shotgun locked in the car, how far I'd have to run to get to it, how slow that would be if something went sideways. But he just stood there with his dog, looking around. Then he pointed off into the trees, down the slope where the sounds had come from last night. His face didn't change much, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at us for a second, then just said something like, "Keep an eye out. Animals out here walk on two legs sometimes." Then he tipped his cap and walked back to his truck. He and the dog got in, the engine coughed back to life, and he rolled off down the road, the truck's rattle fading into the woods. That line stuck with me, not just because it was creepy, though it was, but because he said it like he knew something. Like it wasn't a warning, it was a memory. Couldn't shake it. We didn't leave right away. Part of me wishes we had. But we'd planned for 3 nights, and it was only our second day. So we stuck it out. That night, we kept the fire bigger. We put the shotgun closer to the tent. We didn't drink as much. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something that still wakes me up sometimes. It was the sound of footsteps. Not animal sounds, those tend to be fast, light, shuffling. These were steady, deliberate, like boots crushing leaves. Not running, not sneaking, just walking, close. I unzipped the tent just a bit and looked out. I couldn't see anything. The fire had died down, casting just enough light to make everything feel more dangerous. Shadows everywhere. Every flicker from the embers looked like movement. Then I heard it again, closer this time. Crunch, crunch. We sat completely still in our sleeping bags. I could feel my buddy's breathing had slowed. We were both wide awake, not making a sound. The footsteps circled the tent. Once, twice, then nothing. We didn't sleep after that. The first light, we packed everything as fast as we could. I didn't care if we left something behind, we just threw our gear into the 4Runner and got out of there. I kept my hand on the shotgun the entire drive down that logging road, my eyes on the rear view, expecting something, or someone, to step out behind us. We didn't talk much on the drive back. Once we had service again, I called my girlfriend. Just hearing her voice grounded me, made me feel like we'd really made it out. A few days later, I looked up cougar sounds online. That scream? It matched. That's probably what we heard the first night. But the footsteps the next night? That wasn't a cougar. And the old man with the gun, just rolling up out of nowhere? I don't know. All I know is I'll never camp that deep in the woods again without staying armed, alert, and a lot closer to civilization. Because he was right. The most dangerous things out there aren't the animals. It's the people, the ones walking on 2 legs. We'd planned the Grand Canyon trip for months. It was something I'd always wanted to do with our daughter while she was still little. She was 3 years old then, talkative, clever, endlessly curious. The kind of kid who could make a game out of a stick and a patch of dirt. My husband and I had been trying to get outdoors more with her, show her places outside the city, get her to fall in love with nature the way we had when we were younger. So we settled on a short camping trip near the South Rim, just a few nights. Enough to see the sights, take a few short hikes, and feel like we were doing something worthwhile. We packed everything carefully. We had a checklist: tent, sleeping bags, water jugs, food, sunscreen, hats, maps, first aid kit. We made sure we brought toys and books for our daughter, snacks she liked, a few changes of clothes for accidents. It was hot that week, over 100 degrees during the day, but we figured if we planned things right, we could beat the heat by staying in the shade during the afternoon and only doing real walking in the early morning or near sunset. The campsite wasn't very crowded when we arrived. It was a weekday, mid-morning, and the sun was already brutal. We picked a site with some scrubby trees and flat dirt, close enough to the bathroom area that we could walk there easily, but not so close that we'd have foot traffic going by all the time. We pulled in and got to work. Tent went up first. Then we rolled out the sleeping bags, hung a tarp for extra shade, set up the foldable table and chairs. My husband handled the fire ring and cookware while I kept our daughter close, helping her pick out sticks and rocks while making sure she didn't wander too far. The van sat just behind our tent. It was our base camp, really, a newer minivan with plenty of space, filled with bags, supplies, and folded clothes. We used it to keep anything we didn't want in the tent, and I always made sure it was locked when we weren't around. Except when we were actively using it, it stayed shut. That first day went fine. We took her to a viewpoint near the rim, holding her hands tightly the whole time, taking pictures and pointing out the layered reds and oranges of the canyon. It was hotter than I expected, but the dry air tricked you into thinking you weren't sweating. We kept giving her water, trying to keep things slow and comfortable. She was excited, bouncing around, talking nonstop. She called the canyon the Big Hole, which made us laugh. It was fun. We had lunch at the site under our tarp, cold sandwiches and chips. She napped in the tent for an hour, then we all just stayed in the shade through the peak of the heat. That evening, we made a simple dinner on the camp stove, mac and cheese and sliced apples. We sat around the fire ring, even though it was too hot for a fire, just to go through the ritual. She ran circles around us, chasing a fly, then picking up pebbles, then crouching down to draw a circle in the dust. My husband and I were both tired, but content. It felt like one of those simple family moments you always remember later, when your kid's grown up. We put her to bed in the tent around 8, the sun still faintly glowing orange on the horizon. She went down fast, her small body curled in the sleeping bag like a bean. We sat outside for another hour, listening to the distant hum of other campers, the occasional car driving past on the loop. It was peaceful. We went to bed just before 10. The next morning, we woke up with the sun baking the tent like an oven. It was probably just after 7, but it already felt close to 90 degrees. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, blinking in the bright light. My husband stirred behind me, and I walked to the van to grab some things. Snacks for her, maybe juice, sunscreen. Our daughter was sitting inside the tent when I opened it again. She was rubbing her eyes, her hair messy. I helped her get dressed, then brought her out into the shade and sat her down with her toys while I got breakfast started. It was all normal. What happened next didn't come with a warning. There wasn't some sudden noise or a moment of realization that hit me like thunder. It was quiet, uneventful. That's what made it terrifying. I turned around to ask her something, and she wasn't there. I looked left and right, checked the tent. Nothing. The space under the tarp was empty. I thought she might have wandered behind the van to look at something. I walked over, glanced around. Nothing. My stomach dropped. I called her name. No answer. I jogged to the next campsite, just a few yards away, asked if they'd seen a toddler, but they hadn't. My voice got louder. I started walking faster, then jogging, calling out again. My husband popped his head out of the tent, confused. I could see his expression shift as he realized what I was saying. He bolted in the other direction, toward the bathrooms. We split up without saying a word, both of us shouting her name. I checked the van, opened the side door, looked across the seats under the bags. I didn't see her, said her name. Nothing, just stillness and heat. I shut the door and took off again, running from site to site, circling the area in widening loops, calling until my throat felt raw. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time got weird. I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. I was trying to keep control, trying to be methodical, but I couldn't breathe properly. The heat was closing in on me. I couldn't think. Every horrible possibility bloomed in my mind. A stranger had taken her. She'd wandered into the canyon. She'd fallen somewhere. Coyote, a snake, the sun. She was so small. The heat was brutal. Kids die fast in this kind of heat. I had read that before. My husband's voice cut through the air. He was shouting louder than before. My heart slammed. I turned and ran toward the sound. He was at the van. I reached him just as he opened the side door again. He reached in and pulled her out. Sweaty, red-faced, but awake. She squinted at the light and clung to him. Her hair was wet. Her cheeks were flushed. She was okay. Alive. Safe. I dropped to my knees. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I could barely hold myself up. I felt like I might vomit or pass out or both. My husband was saying something, probably telling me she was fine, but I couldn't hear it over the sound of my pulse in my ears. She had been hiding, playing, under a pile of clothes in the back of the van. I had taught her how to use the sliding doors months earlier. It was one of those parent moments where you think, this is a good thing, she's learning independence. We'd practiced it. I showed her how to press the button, how to close it herself. She loved doing it. It made her feel grown up. She had climbed in quietly, shut the door, hidden, probably smiling to herself, maybe waiting to pop out and surprise us, the way she always did when she played hide and seek at home. But it was over 100 degrees. The van was like a furnace. The sun had been hitting it full force, and I had shut that door myself. I hadn't seen her. I looked right past her. I said her name, but she stayed silent, like she was playing the game. I shut the door, not knowing. I left her in there. If my husband hadn't thought to check again, if we'd waited even 15 more minutes, she might not have made it. We didn't stay another night. We packed everything in near silence. We didn't speak, not out loud. I think both of us were still in shock. It didn't feel real. She sat in her car seat with her favorite toy, sipping from her water bottle, oblivious to how close we'd come to disaster. We drove out of the campground and straight into town. We found a motel with a cabin-style room, air conditioning, cold water, a clean bed. We stayed there the rest of the trip, canceling everything else. That night, I lay in bed beside her, watching her chest rise and fall. I didn't sleep. My thoughts looped endlessly, replaying those few minutes over and over. What if he hadn't checked again? What if she had passed out before he opened the door? What if I had killed her? That's what haunted me. Not just the fear, but the guilt. The idea that I'd made a decision, closing that door, that could have ended her life. It doesn't matter that I didn't mean to. It doesn't matter that I thought I had checked. I made the move. I shut her in. I walked away. I've never felt that kind of sickness before. It wasn't a stomach flu or a headache. It was deeper than that. Like my body was trying to punish me. Like every part of me wanted to collapse in on itself. Even now, I still feel it. I still think about that alternate version of events. The one where she didn't make it, where he didn't find her, where we spent the rest of our lives wondering how we missed her, where her name gets read out on the news and strangers leave comments about how it could have been prevented. That reality is close, too close. It hovers right behind this one, breathing down my neck. But that's not what happened. She lived. She made it out of that van, sweaty and dazed but whole. She ran around the cabin the next morning, laughing. She told us she was playing hide and seek. She said she was sorry we got scared. She didn't understand the danger, not really. Not yet. We left the Grand Canyon the day after that. Drove home in silence with the windows down and the AC blasting. We didn't listen to music. We didn't talk much. Just held hands when we could. Reached into the back seat to It was the summer of 2000, and I was 16 years old. My parents were both in their 50s, and they had raised me on the outdoors. I can't remember a summer where we didn't camp at least once, usually more than that. This particular trip was in a remote corner of southern Utah, a place my mom's side of the family had known for generations. My grandpa had been born not far from the area, on a cattle ranch long since abandoned. It was isolated. No cell service, no towns within any rail driving distance, just rocky red terrain, cedar and pinyon juniper trees, and the occasional dust cloud kicked up by a passing animal or a rare vehicle. We had driven in several hours earlier in the afternoon. There wasn't much of a road, more like a set of deep ruts through the dry dirt, winding along ridgelines and dipping into shallow arroyos. We stopped at a little clearing that sat between some scrubby trees and a cliff face that fell off into a canyon about 200 yards away. The view was stunning, layers of tan and red rock, folded and eroded into formations that looked like frozen waves. A wide horizon where you could watch the sun disappear without another human light in sight. We set up camp the usual way. My dad handled the big dome tent. I helped with the stakes and unrolled the foam pads. My mom arranged the food and unpacked the cooler. It was hot, dry desert heat that made your skin feel tight and your throat thirsty even when you weren't moving. We cooked over the fire after it got dark, made some foil dinners with potatoes and hamburger, then followed them with s'mores. We'd done it 100 times before, but this was the first time I remember the silence so clearly. No bugs chirping, no wind rustling in the branches, Not even the far-off buzz of an airplane. The silence pressed in like weight. It didn't feel peaceful. Felt strange. We sat around the fire a little longer, just watching the flames and poking coals with sticks. I remember glancing over at the shadows around the trees. They felt thicker than they should have. My parents were talking about something, probably how my mom's dad used to take her up this way when she was little. I started feeling uneasy, but I couldn't explain it, so I kept quiet. Eventually, we all decided to turn in. The tent wasn't big, but it fit the three of us on our pads. I was in the middle, my parents on either side. I remember my dad unzipping the front flap and peering out one last time before he zipped it shut again. Then we shut off the flashlights. I was tired but not sleepy. The heat from the day still clung to the ground, and the inside of the tent felt stuffy. I could hear my dad breathing heavy. Not quite a snore yet, but close. My mom shifted a few times, and then everything went quiet again. It wasn't long before I heard the sound. It was faint at first, a soft rustling outside the tent, barely enough to register. Then something heavier, a slow pad of weight shifting onto a stick, then off. The kind of sound you wouldn't even notice unless everything else was dead quiet. I held my breath, my ears strained. Then I heard it again, closer, a sniffing noise, low to the ground. Something circling. I didn't move. I don't think any of us did. There was no mistaking what it was. My dad had warned me about them before, mountain lions. He'd seen one once years ago in Arizona. Said it was the biggest animal he'd ever seen up close without a fence in between. He told me they could move almost silently, that they'd circle their prey, getting a feel for the situation before making a move. And this one was circling our tent. The steps were slow, not hesitant, deliberate. It wasn't running or charging. It was checking, scanning, sniffing. I could hear its breath, low and steady. Sometimes it paused, and I could picture it standing still, watching, deciding. My mind raced. I wondered if it could smell the remnants of our dinner, if we had left anything out, even by accident. I thought of the trash bag tied up in the tree nearby, the half-burnt food scraps still cooling in the fire pit. The sound circled once, then again. I counted maybe 3 passes, though I lost track. I didn't dare move. I didn't even turn my head. We were all wide awake, but no one spoke. There was nothing to say. All we could do was lie there, frozen in place, as this thing just outside the thin nylon walls of our tent decided what to do. Then it let out a sound I'll never forget. It was low, guttural, like a growl drawn out into a sort of moaning snarl. Not loud, just enough to make your stomach turn to ice. I felt it in my chest, the vibration of it. It wasn't posturing or trying to scare us. It sounded irritated, hungry, curious. That went on for what felt like 30 minutes. Could have been 15, could have been 40. Time didn't work right during that stretch. Every second felt like it might be the one where claws slashed through the fabric. Then something happened that I still don't understand. The fire sparked to life. It had been mostly dead when we went to bed. Coals, some ash, maybe a few smoldering embers. But now, suddenly, it flared up, a small burst of flame climbing up a blackened stick and catching on dry pieces of bark. The glow cut through the darkness in an instant. I couldn't see out of the tent, but I saw the shadow of the firelight on the walls. The soft glow was enough to push back the black, and the sounds outside stopped. I didn't hear it run, didn't hear it yowl or cry or growl again, but it left. The slow steps retreated, quicker this time, fading out into the desert night. We didn't move for a long time after that. When we finally unzipped the flap, the fire was still flickering. My dad used a flashlight and scanned the area. No sign of it. No tracks we could see in the loose dirt. No eyes glinting in the dark. The rest of the night we spent in silence. None of us went back to sleep. The fire kept burning low until morning. When the sun came up, we packed everything quickly. My dad didn't say much, just folded the tent and tied it down. My mom's hands were shaky, but she moved fast. I gathered the trash and ashes and made sure nothing was left behind. We drove out in silence, bumping over the ruts and dips, watching the scrub and boulders slide past. I didn't really feel safe until we hit pavement again, 2 hours later. We didn't talk about it for a while. Weeks passed, then months. It became one of those family stories that floats to the surface once in a while but never gets explained. The fire starting like that on its own still bothers me. I've tried to reason it out. Maybe the embers were hotter than we thought. Maybe a breeze kicked up just right. Maybe something fell into the coals and reignited it. But it felt like it happened exactly when we needed it most. We didn't tell anyone for a long time. It just sounded too strange. But there was no magic, no ghosts, just an animal, a family, and a fire. And fear, real fear that changes how you see things. Stuck with me. We still camp. Not as often and not in places that remote anymore. That night taught me what it really means to be alone in the wild. It's not about being without a phone or electricity. It's about being stripped down to the thin walls of your tent, listening in the dark while something stronger, faster, and more silent than you makes its decision. And that time we were lucky. Maybe it lost interest. Maybe the fire scared it. Maybe it was never going to attack. But it could have. And that's what keeps the memory fresh. That moment when the wild doesn't care who you are or where you came from. It just listens and waits. And you lie there hoping to see the sun again.